This is Performance Anxiety on the Pantheon Podcast Network, and I am your host, Mark. And this is such a cool episode of Side Projects. It's the art of improv. And I have to say, I felt a little bit guilty prepping for this one. Ev and Paul from Cinema Cinema have both been on the podcast before, but never together. And we were all joined by the enigmatic Thor Harris. There's a lot of juice in this one. And to say all three guests were well-versed in improvisational music is possibly the biggest understatement that I've ever made. It's almost like saying McDonald's is well-versed at making fast food. But we begin with a brief history of Thor and how he started playing music and eventually improvisational music. I also get reacquainted with Ev, Paul, and Cinema Cinema. They have just released an album of music that is entirely improvisational, and they tell me the whole story behind this session. Yes, session. The album, Mjolnir, was recorded in one day in 3 30-minute sessions with Thor, Paul, and Ev. Thor arrived at BC Studios in Gowanus, Brooklyn, arms swinging with no instruments. No music or lyrics were prepared, and this was the first time Ev and Paul had ever met Thor. So out came Ev's guitar, Paul's drums, including a tin whistle he keeps for just such an emergency, and a whole bunch of neglected instruments from the studio's closets. This was an exercise of being forced to stay in the moment. Nothing was prepared and time was limited. What came out of the sessions was magical. It was so magical that Thor and Cinema Cinema are working on plans to play live together. So pick up Mjolnir on Cinema Cinema's Bandcamp page. Follow them at Cinema Cinema Band on Instagram. Follow Thor at Thor Harris for more info. Follow us at Performance ANX. Buying stuff at performanceanx.threadless.com or sending us coffee money at ko-fi.com/performanceanxiety helps us out tremendously. Now throw everything aside and check out The Art of Improv with Cinema Cinema and Thor Harris on Performance Anxiety on the Pantheon Podcast Network. Man, what a group.
Yeah. You know what? I haven't been in the same room as these two guys since we made the record. Because there was this pandemic. You may have heard about it.
I think I must have missed that. I don't know.
Oh, good for you.
Well, this is going to be a real loose, almost kind of improvisational show. The point of the show is about the album that you guys have just released, but I've always wanted to kind of talk about improvisational music because it's something that fascinates me. I've done like 90% of people who have podcasts. I've done some improv in other areas like comedy, but I'm not a musician. And so improvisational music fascinates me. So I wanted to find out a little bit about how you guys got into improvisational music, what kind of improvisational music you do, and how you guys all met and created the new album. I'm going to butcher this. I'm like 30% Norwegian, and I'm going to F this up every time I try to say it. Mjolnir.
Yeah.
That not too bad?
Yeah.
All right.
Pretty good.
I want to find out a little bit about what drew you guys into improvisational music in the first place. And so Ev and Paul, you guys have both been on the podcast with your previous two albums, and we've discussed those and the insanity that is Cinema Cinema, because it's just one of the wildest bands I've heard in ages. So I know a little bit about your background regarding how you got into music and the improvisational nature of your music. But Thor, this is your first time on the podcast, so I want to learn a little bit more about what drew you to improvisation. How did you get into it? When did you first discover that it was something that was interesting to you?
I think I'm older than those guys. I was born in 1965. So when I came up, I was living in coastal Texas, and I was listening to, at that time, like a lot of funk and soul was on FM and AM radio, like Motown, Stax, all that stuff was huge. That's the stuff that I grew up on. But for some reason, I wanted to play drums really badly when I was a kid. And when once you get through the basics of becoming a drummer, you sort of you're like, okay, what's next? Like, what's the next hardest thing that I can do? I will become a jazz drummer. That is exceedingly hard and just gets, endlessly complex. Well, the fact of the matter is, I grew up with soul music and then eventually rock and roll. I never became a jazz drummer, but I do like a lot of jazz. It wasn't the music of my soul, Okay. I was just into what I was into. And then I got into prog rock, right? Because it was like the early 70s. Yeah. And those drummers are insanely good, like Bill Bruford and
Alan White.
Alan White and Giles from the first King Crimson record. And those drummers are just... So that was a lot of fodder for my study, the world of prog rock. So, but a lot of those groups, there wasn't that much improv, but I still was trying to become a jazz drummer. So I was still listening to a lot of improvised music. And what I gotta say about improvised music, well, I got a lot to say about it, but one thing is that so I've played in rock bands where everything was pretty much worked out and we knew what we were going to do from night to night. And that was fun. It's always fun to tour the country with your friends and set up and play a show. But when you're doing it by rote, night after night after night, it becomes incredibly dull, I guess.
That makes sense.
So, whereas if you're doing improv, you have to pay attention. You have to listen. Everything could go terribly wrong at any minute.
Right.
There's just, everything is at risk all the time. There's no safe resting place at any moment, and nobody knows where we're going. Right.
Right.
So it's far more exciting, and it does demand absolute concentration. Whereas you can play drums in a rock band, and once you got the songs down, you can kind of just think about whatever you want to think about.
What are you doing for dinner afterwards?
Yeah, exactly. But I want to tell you about how I met these guys. There's a publicist who we all love very much. His name's Howard Wolfing.
Love Howard.
Yeah, I love that guy. He's worked with Swans, and I was in a band called Shearwater, and he did publicity for at least one of our records. And he's done publicity for tons of people that I know. And
me too.
Yes. And he introduced me to these guys, and I just really liked them. And we chatted a lot back when Twitter was good. We chatted a lot on that. I mean, it really was a fun place when it was new. Now it's like, another thing I'd love to say is just that, man, billionaires ruin everything.
Don't they?
You guys live in New York, ruined by billionaires. Twitter, ruined by billionaires. The planet Earth, it's getting hotter. It's my fault. I've driven a car, but it's even more the fault of Exxon executives.
And a lot of... I'll say this. I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. It's ruined by politicians because they'll have these amazing summits, right, where they're going to discuss global warming, and they all fly their private jets to a little island somewhere to discuss the damage everyone else is doing to the planet. But my private jet's okay. I'll buy some carbon offset. It'll be all right.
Yeah.
Fuck them. I hate them. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. Before you skip over this ad, give me 1 minute. Like most podcasts, I pick sponsors carefully, and I use the products that advertise here. Pure Spectrum CBD is a product that has been really beneficial for me. They have a wide variety of great products that can be used on a daily or as-needed basis. I've been using the tincture every day, and it's been wonderful for easing anxiety. And I absolutely love the isolate. I use it instead of acetaminophen or ibuprofen, and it's worked so well for the relief of aches and pains. They also have soaks, lotions, salves, gummies, and more, plus an entire line for fitness recovery. They even have products for your pets. See everything they offer at purespectrumcbd.com. And if you have questions, they're there to help. They helped me when I had no idea where to start. After you fill your cart, use code PerformanceANX for 15% off your purchase. Pure Spectrum CBD, Pure Spectrum CBD, Pure Spectrum CBD.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
So when we recorded that record, we were in Martin Bisi's studio, and we've made a few Angels of Light records there and a few Swans records there. And I lived there for a few weeks at a time.
Wow.
And Martin is just a dear man.
So I've got a question before we jump into the album. And this is, again, for Thor. In the descriptions for a lot of the work you've done, you're described as an accomplished polyrhythmic percussionist. I'm not a musician. Can you explain what a polyrhythmic percussionist is?
That's pretty... I think what they mean when they say polyrhythmic, what I think they mean is like rock and roll is very simple music. It's very simple and very, in general, a very rigid form. The opposite of that is all of the music that came from West Africa, moved across the Atlantic Ocean in the form of slavery, and became all Latin music. It's like many rhythms that may at least sort of seem like they're in different time signatures being played over the top of each other. That's what polyrhythm is.
Okay.
And I sort of got into it a little bit through prog rock, but then I had this teacher in college. He was a drum teacher. I took piano in college also, but I had this great drum teacher named Barry Larkin at Stephen F. Austin State University in really boring town in East Texas. And he turned me on. He gave me written charts of all these crazy Latin rhythms, told me to listen to Tito Puente.
Oh, wow.
Completely blew my mind. I was just, because I grew up on rock and roll and soul and fairly, 4/4 stuff, which I still love. But there was this whole world of super complex rhythm that just blew my 19-year-old mind when Barry Larkin gave me these sheets with like a samba and 7/8 on, and...
Right. All right. So Ev, you and Paul have been playing together for ages now. Your live shows are insane. I'm still waiting to see one because you guys haven't been able to get down to DC since the last time Ev was on First. And I don't think you've been to DC since that time. At least not that I know of. I may have missed a show, but is it easier to do improv once you guys have had so much time together? Is it harder because you fall into the same, I don't want to say traps, but the same rhythms, the same habits when you're playing together?
Well, it's good to be back, Mark.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it's good to listen to Thor talk for a while. We haven't been in the same room since the day that we cut this music together. Wow. And it's a memory that I know resonates for Paul and I. Really beautiful and exhilarating. And we'll get to more of it later because it really was a product of improv songwriting, I guess you can call it. Paul and I have done a lot of different improv over the years, and the last two records before this one, which we were on your podcast talking about, were improv entirely, and they were in a little more of a free jazz area. Mm-hmm. Say that only maybe I say that because mind attaches to that because there was a lot of horns. I start to think of John Zorn and a lot of interesting, stabby, unpredictable, strange moving music. So, right. but the point to get back to it is you can't really practice for improv. You could only get comfortable with the player or players that you're playing with. So, I mean, like Thor had mentioned, doing material that's structured and rehearsed, you can get muscle memory, and you can kind of get it down and you can wander a bit. When the magic of improv is you're in the moment, that's where you want to be. And it's hard to get there often. But improv Definitely brings you to a place where you're listening, while you're creating. Like Thor said, you don't know where you're going next. So for Paul and I, improv has been a part of the language that we speak musically since the beginning. We've been playing 15 years now, and we're cousins. Something there has revealed a bit of a telepathic thing that we get to do. I think people who grow together and do music, maybe if they aren't cousins, can form that. But Paul and I have something there. We can kind of react the same way. We become a two-headed monster of sorts. We've never been able to render the same song the same exact way twice, even when we aren't improving, because there's a certain exhilaration, this excitement, this jubilee, this panic, this happening that occurs when we play, where we suddenly become who we really are, and we can't like focus enough to do the song just the way we might have done it. Like the way on the album is the way it was that day, and that's for the stuff that we work on, right. So it kind of speaks to how far we get into what we do when we do it together. So wearing the improv smock, together, Paul and I, look, that's very, very comfortable. I don't find that we necessarily go down the same paths, although I'd say there are one or two different footholds, on the rocky trail where we know how to kind of like pivot and get somewhere. We can make our way out. We can make our way out of the weeds together, but we let each other get lost in the weeds too. That's the thing I think that's really important with improv. As free as you are, you're also allowing those who are playing with you to be just as free. So there is a sense of what's going to happen next, and in a way, like life, because it's so unpredictable, like you really don't know what's going to happen next. And sometimes you go into this major thing in your life with all these expectations and thoughts, and then you're just in it and it's happening. And then it's over and you have some sweat on your brow, made it through. And sometimes an improv session is like that. Like, was it good or bad? Luckily, good or bad doesn't really exist. And we found that out in the moment, like it just was what the fuck it was, like let's do it again. And it'll just be a tribute to what it was then, because we don't know what it was, so right. It's a beautiful thing. And I think that we love to do it. And I'm lucky that Paul and I have that connection. I'll let Paul maybe comment on it a little. Lord knows I could go on tangential polls that'll make this the 5-hour edition of it time tonight.
The extended version. So, Paul, I do have a question for you about working with Ev and all. So you guys have been playing together 15 years. There's about, I think there's like a 10-year age difference between you guys?
That's right.
When you first started playing together, were you doing a lot of improv in the beginning, or was that something that Ev kind of brought to you, or were you comfortable and familiar with it already?
I don't think that before we started playing together that either of us were really doing any type of improv playing at all.
Wow.
I spent time in high school in a jazz band, like in a jazz ensemble, like that was put on through the school, but we were reading kind of like charts and stuff. So like I was very rigidly, following a song, so I wasn't really, even though I was doing jazz, I wasn't really experimenting or doing anything crazy like that. So yeah, I mean, I think just from like I just know that from my perspective, when I first got in a room, it was like, okay, I'm like playing with Ev now, and this is really happening. I was so excited, and from, just put yourself in my like 18-year-old shoes at that time. And, and to me, I always had looked up to Ev from afar. I always thought that he was a very talented songwriter specifically, and musician. And I just was so pumped to just be in the room with him, be like, okay, like, I think I'm like trying out for the band now. This is happening.
I love it.
So I was very, I think that my juice was boiling at that time, and my cup runneth over, I just let it all out, and he received my juices, and he's like, "Oh, well, you think you got juices? I got a whole refrigerator stocked full of it." So like he basically, not that we were pushing each other, not in a negative way,
right?
Never. You know what I mean? Maybe if we were brothers, maybe that would be the case, but cousins, it was this very kind of just joyous, like, oh my God, this kid's actually good, and oh my God, he is the amazing musician that I thought he was, and like we just kind of kept meeting each other kind of in the middle of like this amazing cyclone of creativity that we had on that very first time we played together. And we were, I think, improving. The first thing we did was just jam. And I didn't really ever jammed with anybody before, like in earnest, so like we were kind of just doing it from day one. And like, I think, if you remember this, the first practice we ever had, we had someone like watching us and looking through the window of the studio, like, there's only two guys in there, like, so because I think from the beginning, we didn't really have the mentality of like, oh, we're going to be an improv crazy, effects experimental driven two-piece that we're going to then expand into doing crazy trio records and stuff. Like we were like, maybe we'll get a bassist, or I don't know, like we briefly had that thought, maybe for like the first hour of the first practice. And then pretty much, like after that, it was like, okay, you do what you do and I do what I do, or vice versa. Like we'll be able to sustain this. And it just kept evolving from there. And, I think doing improv with two dudes is a little bit of maybe a little cheating, because you can kind of have like a little bit of a conversation. Like I can take the lead and pass it to Ev and back and forth. So, but it really laid a good foundation for us to have other people sitting with us, like Thor and like Matt Dario on previous records and stuff. And it's been this really cool, like we kind of create a good foundation for us to build with other people. And, so fortunate that we were able to make this new record with Thor. I mean, I'll stop talking now, but I definitely want to talk about how much fun it was and the whole experience playing the album, especially because it's so exciting to see Thor on my phone again. So, anyway, that's pretty much. Well,
you made two interesting points that I really liked. The one that you guys were open to doing whatever with each other. And I think that helps with improv in no matter what you're doing, whether it's music or acting, comedy, and being open to any idea is vital. I know when I was doing improv comedy, the whole point is there's two words you have to always use, and it's yes and. And I think that's the same with music. You have to be open. You can't shut somebody down, because then it's dead. And I think the other point you made was that with two people, you're much more open to having another outside person come in and make something completely unique, because with two people, there's nowhere for you to hide. I don't care. I know, Ev, you use some amazing effects, but you can't, with just you and Paul, and say there's no hiding. Having a third person come in can help direct things to a really unusual space. And I think that's what happened with Mjolnir. I think I remember reading that this was recorded around the same time as your last two albums, in the same pre-pandemic.
This was the day we recorded. This was in June of 2019.
Okay.
So we cut this in a day. Of 2019.
You cut it in a day.
I mean, we'll tell you the magical story of the day. And there was a lot of aftercare from doctor, producer, magic maven Martin Bisi with us in the editing process. And there was some juice thrown on and about by Bisi, etc. But it was done in a day back in the summer of 2019, all the big tracks.
That's amazing.
We also, another sweet little detail, we had never met in the flesh before that day that we cut all that. It was a love affair that was seeded by Howard Wolfing and watered in the garden of Twitter and the internets, and pushed along by the nonstop drive of Paul and I to try to take the next step and do one that makes sense. And it was this happy synergy where Thor and us had started this bit of a relationship and talked about the project. We had already been making records with Martin Bisi, the magical Martin at Bisi Studio, since we met him in 2012. I told the story before on the podcast, so I won't reiterate. But when Hurricane Sandy destroyed a lot of Brooklyn, it destroyed our practice space, which was a few blocks from his recording studio. He was out checking out the damage of the area that day as we recovered our gear. I noticed him. I called him over like some friend of his. He realized that we were strangers, but I assured him we were safe strangers, and we bonded over the broken gear and the tragedy that it enshrouded Brooklyn in October of 2012, that Hurricane Sandy, and we were in the world. Next thing you know, we're playing shows together. We went to Europe together. We recorded at a place. We became good friends, and we're grateful to be in that orbit. So that being said, Thor also friendly to BC, friend of that place itself. Here we are. Thor is going to be coming to New York for another project to work with some other great musicians, but he has a free afternoon. BC makes that afternoon free for himself and for the studio, and says, come on in, I'll put the microphones up.
Wow.
Essentially, in the weeks leading up, Paul and I at practice kicked around the idea of we had a bunch of prepared material that we really liked, that we felt was strong, good stuff. And we were thinking, with the one thought was maybe we'll go in with this prepared stuff and, Thor will adapt because, it'll be fine.
Yeah.
But it felt like that. We quickly got off that. It felt like, why are we trying to put an automatic ceiling on the roof of this thing? Temper, we're going to control it. That's crazy. Let's let it fly. And I think Paul was really pushing in the direction of Ev, we trust our instincts. We trust what we can do. Let's go in there and just go for it. So it was that magical kind of go for it attitude that we had and that Thor had. But ultimately that day was the first time that we met. And it was a pretty magical thing. We were setting up, we were down, BC has been in the Gowanus area of Brooklyn at BC Studio for about 40 years now.
Wow.
I believe in 79, Brian Eno was looking for a large warehouse type space to record ambient music in. Mm-hmm. Some young upstarts were Bill Laswell, Martin BC, Michael Beinhorn, a couple other people. They got involved as the people to kind of steward this space in Gowanus that Eno had acquired. Then Eno got out of the picture within a year or two, and eventually the others got out of the picture, and it became BC's space. So BC's been there forever. Everybody's worked with him, and we're really, really fortunate that he's there and he's as generous as he is.
Yeah.
I mean, the amount of work that he put into this album as well is, I always have to pay tribute to him whenever we talk about this stuff. But the point I wanted to say was BC's been there. It's the old American Can Factory. It's been built in 1885. His studio is behind a couple of different points of entry. You have to get through a first glass door. You would need a key, a second one to be buzzed in, a third one, etc. Now, if you've been there before, sure, you'll know your way, but it doesn't mean you'll have access or passage. So Paul and I get there a little bit before Thor gets there, and we're downstairs with BC in the control in the tracking area. Humongous, huge space. It was a horse stable, I think, 100 years ago. It's
wow,
really cool shape, really large. We're setting up, wondering when Thor's going to get here. Hope Thor is as nice as he seems. He seems cool. Everyone loves Thor.
Hope he shows up.
As a fan, I've stood and watched this man. It's just like right before we became friendly with Thor, I was at a Swan show where Thor was talking to BC 5 feet away from me. And out of respect to the fact that I did not know Thor Harris in person, even though BC is my compadre, I stayed the fuck away from them. So wondering what this man's going to be like. And when they was setting up, and you can't really gain access unless someone buzzes you in, and suddenly comes walking down the steps to the studio like he had a key to the front door somehow, because the universe just opens the door when Thor's in town. It's a basement that you record in, and I'm telling you, it was like sunshine was on this guy's shoulders. He came walking in a tank top like he's wearing now, with both arms swinging, ready to hand out hugs, and with no instruments.
Oh, wow.
Arms swinging is the joke that Paul and I usually use when we tell this hearing story. He came in arms swinging like, I'm ready. We were like, Okay, we want you to play on this. Let's figure out what instruments there are, Mr. Thor. Cool. So,
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors.
it became this really, you talk about improv. We're improving already, mama.
Yeah.
We're jiving already, mama. So it's like Paul starts breaking down part of his drum kit. He's got a piccolo snare I gave him as a birthday gift 5 years ago. I don't know how to buy drum gear. He didn't really ever like it. It was perfect. Perfect for Thor. Nice. Some other stuff. BC's pulling things out of a closet that hasn't been opened since 1986. And this closet literally molded shut. BC's getting it open, pulling out synthesizers that I couldn't believe still worked.
Yeah.
In the bio, it sounds really great. Like he used BC's synthesizer collection. If you were there and you saw the collection, he used the one thing that worked from the pile of stuff in the corner. But the point is, Thor cobbled together a part cocktail kit, part percussion station, part synthesizer area, and Martin mic'd him up. And within minutes, it was like, okay, we're going to get something we've never gotten before because, this is already, the instrumentation we're going to be interacting with, the space that we're going to be making in this for Thor, there's different space we have to make.
Yeah.
Double drums, how is this going to function? So that's a little bit of the, kind of behind the scenes on how we rolled into the session.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
I do like that. Like I just did a solo show in Berlin where I didn't know the instruments at all. Because I didn't actually know I was going there to make a record. And then somebody asked me to do a solo show. And I thought, well, sure, I don't have any instruments. What have you got?
That's the ultimate improv show. You don't even know what instruments you're going to be playing.
Like, you have a violin? I don't play that. Well, but let's see what we can work out.
Oh my God. That is incredible. Did you have any, and this is for Thor, did you have any idea of what you were going to be doing when you got to the studio? Did you have any thoughts of instruments you play or maybe musical ideas ahead of time?
No, I didn't know at all, but I had been to the studio a lot before, and studios generally have like a lot of sort of neglected instruments sitting around, which can be really, a cornucopia of awesome, weird sounds.
Yeah.
So I knew something would work out. I always hope there's going to be like a vibraphone there or something. But as long as there's something laid out, like percussion instruments, really bad ones can be really useful sometimes. Like really bad drums can sound, if you mess with them a little bit, you can get them to sound really interesting. And wow. We all, everybody loves broken cymbals. There's studios are full of broken cymbals. So I knew there would be stuff for me to play with. There was a giant bass drum who, I don't know who it belonged to, but I was like, Martin, can I play the giant bass drum? But no, the owner of it was real uptight about it. So we didn't get to put the giant bass drum on the cinema record, but it's probably still down there.
Yeah.
It's
same dust on it.
Right. A little extra now.
We did a photo shoot there in May. It's still there. Yeah. I don't want to say the name of the owner because they're also, they're a cool musician, although they weren't going to let us use that drum. But, nonetheless, it's there. Can attest to that.
So the album was recorded a few years ago and it was just released this July. Mm-hmm. And Martin BC, like I said, put some amazing effort into this thing. Were there any surprises for and we'll go with each of you unless the answer is the same. Were there any surprises when you heard it back for the first time? When he started sending things back to you? Anything that you were like, I didn't remember that, or that sounds completely different than I remembered it?
All of it was a complete surprise to me at every stage, and a very pleasant surprise. Because monitoring is very imperfect. Okay. And whether you're talking about a live improv show, oftentimes when I do improv music, I reserve judgment until later I can go to Instagram and look at the videos and go, oh, wow, that does sound pretty good. Because from where I was, there was no way I could know what that was. I remember moments like War on You. I remember that. I remember that line. And I thought that was great, Yeah. Turned out better than I remembered it.
All right, so Paul, what about you? Is there any surprises there for you?
I would say too, it's funny that Thor brought up War on You, because that whole song pretty much was created because of that roll he was doing on the hi-hat. That then I was like towards the end of a jam that we were doing, it was like we did like 3 30-minute pieces that we just played our balls off as much as possible. Wow. And hoped it was good. We'd go and listen to it. So by the end of the first 30 minutes that we did, the first time we ever played together, we're just exhausted. And then Thor just gets the bright idea to just do like a 16th notes on the hi-hat. And it's just, we're off. Okay, I guess we got to now go on that journey. So we just did. And I mean, I could really hear, and when I listen back to that song, like I'm kind of, but it actually adds to the track, because like I'm like getting back into it and like coming off of something, and then Thor just goes off on that roll, and then just the way that me and Thor locked in on that, and the way Martin like mixed that and kept that kind of 16th notes on the hi-hat going throughout, like it really propels that whole track, and it like really created one of the standout pieces on the whole album. And I think a lot of the mixing that Martin did with the 2 drums is very impressive to me, because there's times where I truly don't know, like, is that me? Or is that Thor? Like, what did Thor have again? Did he even have toms? Like, I guess he did, like, specifically on Walk Into the Ocean, there's a part where it's like, he's doing, and I'm pretty sure, I would like to take credit for that as my part, but that was Thor. Thor is going on that, and I'm kind of like on the cymbals, and together it creates this really cool thing that we couldn't have, you just couldn't have done with one drummer.
I tell you, I wanna walk into the ocean, into the ocean. If that's the exit, I'll take it. I'll fucking walk into the ocean. If that's your exit, then I'll take it. Walk into the ocean.
Yeah, like those moments when Martin would mix it and kind of, because he mixed a lot of this when we were in the pandemic and we did it remotely. So we would get it back and I would just be like, wow, we had raw mixes from before, and then he would mix it and send it to us and be like, wow, he really cherry picked and found something, and he placed things perfectly. And a lot of that, a lot of credit goes to Martin for the way the record sounds in general.
We love you, Martin. If you hear this podcast,
we'll tag him in it. Hopefully he'll give it a listen. So Ev, what about you? Were there any surprises for you?
Yeah. Total love to Martin. I echo that. And it's, there were a lot of surprises. I'll tell you, the way it worked out, we did that magical session that day. And it was, as Paul said, we did like 3 30-minute jams that were, each one ended in a big hug, and then went and listened back. And I think that we all knew that we were getting something. Paul and I then spent the summer listening to those 3 30-minute jams. Of course, at first, so drunk on our own juices, believing that we recorded a 90-minute opus. Every must see the light of day. That was the first thought.
Oh, yeah.
But we spent more time. Then we took a night's sleep, and then we spent some more time. And we started to find where the indent and the new paragraph began in each jam. And we were hearing what parts were songs and what weren't. And then Martin helped us edit them into pieces. Some of them, that was when some of the surprising parts were at first. But, some of them were almost fully formed Some of them I went back and added some vocals to later on. But ultimately, we went through that process through the fall of 2019. And by the beginning of 2020, I went and laid a couple more vocals. And we were just about to start mixing in March of 2020 with Martin when the pandemic stopped a lot of things.
Yeah.
One of the main reasons why we haven't been down to DC yet, or one of the contributing factors to the album coming out a little bit later on, which turned into a bit of a strategy we had to play because it was ready a few years ago when we released TXMD2 in 2021. This album was already mastered, but we were in a posture as a band that we were still being very, very, very seriously cautious. And we felt we didn't know if we'd even be able to play any shows or do a press campaign that felt comfortable for us to go and talk about ourselves and our music while people are dying and living and the world is divided. It just didn't feel right. And thus us putting out a second jazz album in a row. Really, we wanted to really continue to have our audience down. So by the time Thor could get them all back for us. But the point is, when it came time to mix, we couldn't go to see Martin. So he did it remotely, the beautiful being that he is. And he sent us back mixes back and forth and we listened. And I think the one that jumped out to me that really shocked me was My Vision of the Future.
Oh, okay.
In my vision of the future, you're not included. No, you're not included. In my vision of the future, you and you. Make no sense of you and me. I'm gonna take you from my memory.
And I guess because it's rare that you get such a fully formed piece that just kind of like comes rising out of the smoke of the end of a jam and just becomes a piece that's fully formed. I mean, the thing for me that was weird enough to hear it when I heard it back was like the whole vocal was done in the room, improvised entirely. No lyric sheet, no idea about the vocal before. Not like no lyric sheet, like I worked on this, I got it down, I don't even need to look at the words. Like literally, I had never said my vision of the future ever in my life, that term or that phrase. But we had kind of like stumbled into this humming, buzzing glow of the end of another jam. And Thor was toying around with synth sounds that was making me want to move my guitar out of the way so the synth could have more of a space for a voice. So I caught on to this frozen loop where my guitar is just holding on to this one chord throughout the whole song, which is very rare for Cinema Cinema. Usually my guitar is a little hyperactive and schizophrenic. And Paul gets a chance to utilize some of those jazz chops because there's a lot of snare craziness at the front of it. Yeah. And at the back end too, he starts putting the whole ass on it. There's a beat, there's a real feeling, there's a movement. And all the while Thor is exploring, like fingers over a Ouija board, or like, just walking through like, uncharted territory. And I'm doing this rap or this talk or whatever the whole time that I just did in the room.
That's
and
incredible.
The way Martin mixed it, he took a couple of like words like you, like I said you once, but he grabbed that and he like quadrupled it and then doubled down 4 times in one section. He did it. Paul and I call it their BC droppings. With Martin, he's the wizard, and you're following him through his forest.
Yeah,
you see signs of BC by the droppings, and then you know where he went. So he sweetened the vocal mix on that up, and it really blew my mind listening to it back. Like, wow, Thor, Paul, and I hadn't known each other for more than a few hours. And this is one of the most proud this is one of the pieces of music I'm part of that I'm most proud of yet. Holy cow, like we did something, and it was really cool to learn to sit with something that you feel you have this faith in, this material, and wait until it was an appropriate time to release, because I know I'm hyper crazy and I want everyone to know right now what we're doing. I mean, Paul and I have another album recorded. We're writing another one, all this stuff. But the point is, it's like everything has its time, and now feels like really the right time. It's the 15th year anniversary of me and Paul being in the band. It's a somewhat healthier time for the world and the environment, although it's still the worst time it's ever been and we're all going to hell. But I mean, we're out of the recent dark ages of the new 2020s with COVID, and we're in this new kind of dealing with the diminished world that we're in now ages. But really glad to have it see the light of day now and to be here talking about it. And yeah, my vision of the future freaked me out. Pretty cool.
Well, you answered two other questions I had. Lyrically, was everything improvised? So at least some of it seemed to be lyrically improvised. And there seemed to be, to me, a connection between, let's see, it was My Vision of the Future and Voiceless Idaho, lyrically. And was that something that you guys were doing, or was that a BC dropping?
No, that was part of the improv.
Okay.
I think My Vision of the Future was the jam session before Voiceless Idaho.
Okay.
But so if there was 3 jam sessions, I'd say My Vision of the Future was birthed from the middle jam session. I know the Voiceless Idaho was the last one because I detuned my guitar. I changed the tuning of my guitar to drop D. And if there's a couple of songs on the album that are in that tuning, then I know it came from that last jam, and Voiceless Idaho is one of them. And I think that I was riffing in the room when I started that song off saying, my vision of the past. Because I felt like I wanted to comment on what I had just said. I didn't know that it was going to become anything in a song, but I knew that whatever freak out I went into on what previously was strong enough that maybe I was trying to recreate it at first, or I didn't know how to start that one lyrically. That might be one of those improv things where it's like maybe I was relying on something to get me going, but nonetheless, it got me going. And it was yes and. I'll tell you, of the 8 songs, about 5 of the songs are entirely lyrically improv while we did it all.
Wow.
Martin was saying after the fact, like, Ev, all these vocals are on the scratch vocal mic. Like, it's his worst vocal mic. He has these, like, Neumann or Niemann. He has these special German mics that are, like, so expensive, so cool and great that he uses usually when I cut vocals, and all this stuff actually makes me sound like a monster. But, like, these vocals were all on this tiny, like, SM, like, 57, an SM 58, like a directional speaker cab mic that I was just, like, eating. And it's like, Ev, these vocals I understand they are good. I understand you want to keep them. I got to do work on this. He really dug in to harvest what he could. But yeah, I'd say 5 of the 8 songs are entirely lyrically improvised. I went back in and I put some vocals on 3 of the songs that didn't have lyrics right before the pandemic stopped everything.
The thing that blows me away is that there's songs that sound like Cinema for sure. War on You, Walk to the Ocean, to me, they sound like Cinema. There are songs that, and it makes me wonder if they would sound different if you had somebody else besides Thor in there, or if it was just the 2 of you, because I think my favorite song on the album is probably one of the biggest departures for you guys in Info Ghetto.
Don't go. Don't go. Don't go. Don't go. You're not gonna get the whole story. You have to beat it out of me.
That's my favorite song on the album. I absolutely love that song, and I don't think it would have been the same without Thor.
No, that's Info Ghetto was the first part of the first jam.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it came within the first like 10 minutes of playing. And the info ghetto itself is the internet. That's what that title is referring to.
That makes sense.
I mean, because it's just such a healthy place for information, but it's not a healthy place to dwell. So it's kind of like,
Man, I'm going to call it that. I'm going to call the internet that from now on. The info ghetto.
Me too.
Let's remember, this is where that term was coined, right here.
Gold.
The info ghetto.
That's what it is. And that's, I mean, the refrain in that is just, I need. It kind of says it, the lyrics say, you know, like, you're not going to get the whole story. Yep. You have to beat it out of me. Some things you got to carry. You know, I'm going to take this with me. And then I need. So the first, you know, it's kind of like saying, like, it's like, yeah, I like, you know, I have to live my life. Some things are my own. You know, I have to get away from this nonstop, you know, like culture that, you know, kind of sucks everything out and wants more and it isn't enough. But then I turned into the manic person who still needs. We all need. I need. So that was one of the songs that didn't have vocals. Just the words "don't go." Oh. I think might have said "don't go," which might have stayed in the song. But other than that, that was one where I actually thought about those lyrics a little bit and laid down those vocals after the fact and wondered if anyone would connect that the info ghetto was the internet. I knew they wouldn't. So I'm glad that we can have it coined here now and make it official moving forward.
I also love Zero Sum. This, particularly the middle section, like around the 4.5 minute mark.
Freezing cold on the sidewalk in the middle of the night. On the sidewalk in the middle of the night. Freezing cold on the sidewalk in the middle of the night. Similar to real life. No one wins. Similar to real life. No one wins.
Before they like Ev's descent into hell kind of section, because that's about 8.5 minutes long. That one, that's a great song.
Thank you. That's a big whale.
Yeah,
and that was one of the first things we recorded too, right? Wasn't that from the first 30-minute jam session?
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I remember hearing like what Thor was doing on the synth he had kind of I guess it was. I don't really know exactly what it was, like a vibraphone or something, like doo, 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 like whatever's at the beginning, the synth sound on the beginning of Voiceless Idaho at the end of the record. I just remember that really standing out to me too, because that we never had that kind of sound at all on one of our records. And I think just hearing different sounds and like getting that vibe too from different like style, like it really helps you kind of go in a different direction, right? Like, and just think about things, and it, you know, who knows? I don't think we were ever really going to a different certain direction with any of these pieces or any of these jams, but subconsciously when you're hearing certain things, it's like it's opening up a doorway that maybe you didn't expect, and like you're not really imagining, and you don't have time to think about it, so you're just totally in the moment, and your hands are just starting to do things and try to, you know, lasso the idea, whatever it is, and then you don't even really realize what it is until it's over. But you know, I think that was the main thing. I think, you know, because you said that, you know, a lot of the stuff does sound like cinema stuff, but I think with Thor, he was a lot of ways almost like the leader of the session, because like we were just listening to what he was doing and letting him kind of subconsciously guide us in certain directions. You know, we passed the ball a few times, you know, like as you do in any improv, but really listening to Thor and just being so happy to, like, okay, all the planning, all the talking, all the twittering and on the info getter and all that stuff, like actually getting to the moment of when we're in the studio and we're going to do it. You know, I think maybe I thought of it just, but I won't speak for Ev, but, you know, I don't know what Thor was thinking either. I think Thor was obviously, I wouldn't say that you were thinking, oh, I need to lead these guys to the promised land or anything. But, you know, to me, I was just like, I got to really listen and pay attention to what this man is doing, because I've never played with him before, first of all, and I have to play with another drummer now, which I had never done. So for me, it was like, I treated it almost like Thor was kind of like the conductor and whatever vibe and that's how we got, you know, great songs like War on You, right? It's just like going with whatever flow Thor decided on in that moment. Not that he was forcing anything on us. I'm just saying, like,
right.
It just, I don't know how you guys feel.
It was a completely outside influence on two guys that have been playing together for 15 years. So that's, to me, it sounds like Mjolnir is like the two previous albums that you guys did, the jazz albums, but more distilled and refined. I thought I heard some winds in there. Is there any, I mean, there's no Matt Dario in this, right? What is that? There's a flute sound in one of the songs.
That's me.
Oh, wow. Awesome.
Yeah. I have like a little tin whistle, Irish tin whistle. I'm half Irish, so I identify a lot with my Irish side. And I've had this little penny whistle, tin whistle thing that actually in previous times we've recorded with Dario, he might have used it or something. Like I just gave it to him and he used it and he's just amazing at it instantly. But, for me, it's just like, just a way to kind of like get some ethereal kind of sounds. And it's just something that I've always kind of have in my stick bag, ready to go. And
such an emergency.
Yep.
A tin whistle emergency.
Yep. And there's certain moments on the jams that kind of called for it, and I was like, maybe we could just edit this out.
You just want to break into a jig somehow. You're set. You are ready.
I try to keep it off the folky stuff and keep it more to the ethereal two notes kind of stuff. It's fun, and it worked on a lot of that stuff too. And I was happy that we didn't cut a lot of it. There is like certain moments. That's another thing Martin kind of brought to the table too, right? He would find a tin whistle part and then boost that in the mix that I didn't even know that. Because again, I wasn't like setting up a tin whistle mic. I stood up and played the tin whistle at the boom mics that were hanging over the set, or played it into the snare mic or something. So there's a lot of cool moments that Martin captured like that too. I think I had a water bottle that I was playing on at one point.
Oh gosh!
I had a belt that I took off and I was slapping it against the drum seat at one point. You might be able to point that out. It's on. I can't remember what song it's on, but it's like just slapping, just seeing what would stick, So it was a lot of fun. Very like free and creative experience.
The song that hits me right behind Info Ghetto to me is Riverhead. I love that organ and how the guitar just builds and builds and builds throughout it. That's the kind of stuff that I love. Who took the lead on that song? Was that another Thor? You guys following Thor, or is that more just something that happened in the middle of one of the 30-minute jams?
That one's a real surprise to me. That one was in the midst of one of the jams, like everything else, of course, but it was really an example to me. When I said earlier, I mentioned improv songwriting, and I was starting to make a bit of a juxtaposition, or I was starting to posit it against our previous two albums that are entirely improv with Dario, with that type of improv, quote unquote, writing. But on those two records, we specifically reduced a lot of the vocals to make room for the horns to be the vocals per se. Okay. So it was a different composition or compositionality, if that's a term, that we were looking at then. Whereas with what we worked on with Thor, these jams all had a different rhythmic quality and different melodies that were arriving as we were making our way through, different tempos we hadn't really touched on. And I'd say midway through one of the jams, suddenly we found ourselves upon this like kind of clearing where like this mournful, tuneful, melodic thing started to occur. And what really surprises me about it is that that was one that didn't have any vocals. I put the vocals all on afterwards. But today, actually, it was intriguing me today because I thought, wow, before I put the vocals on this, when this was just the piece of music that Thor, Paul, and myself composed, what the hell was going on? We're all following each other. Thor is staying in this one specific area where he's like kind of pushing this like organy riff that keeps on. It's like the tilt of the ship. Like the ship keeps on tilting. Paul is keeping the whole thing together, and I'm doing this like mournful bass line type of thing that's kind of doesn't have flash or pizzazz or special sound effects. It's just kind of this pretty motion that's occurring. I know that it was one that when I was listening to it today, and then I listened, and then when I was focusing on even the words, I thought that part came out actually kind of really good as well. That was one where it's like I wasn't quite sure how to approach it, and I didn't want to make it the singing show, although it was a ballad. To me, it sounded like what you might call a ballad, a more of
I
a
can see that.
tune, and I didn't want it to turn into my Sinatra moment. Not that I don't love Frank Sinatra, because I very much do, but this was
Legally, you have to. You're from New York.
Hey, I'm half Italian. Hello. And the point is, I didn't want to turn it into. I didn't want to be a parody of myself or something that I was something else. It's something called me to kind of talk my way through it, and it was fitting. In my opinion, it's a surprise for me. That's one of the ones that if I hadn't said before, my vision of the future. Another big surprise for me is Riverhead. I really don't know how it is that we came across playing in that manner together, but I think, like Paul said, looking back on it now, it wasn't out of like it wasn't purposely like we felt we had to follow Thor, but we definitely identified that we have someone new in our space with us. Mm-hmm. What the hell is he doing? Because it's really easy for Paul and I to bring someone in and just maul them and maul everyone, and they can grab on and they can be dragged. And there's some of the stuff that we've done with Dario where we just got going and of course he made it magic, but then there's also some other stuff that isn't like that. But the point is, with Thor, there was just a different engagement level. I don't know if it was because we had never met before that day, and then the initial meeting was so warm and so pleasant, and just all of a sudden things were rolling, comfortability, that we can trust each other right away. I think that a lot of the reason why the different sounds on this Cinema album, because BC pointed out to us, like, guys, Ev, Paul, after the fact, like, this is definitely a Cinema album. It's just a very different one. Thor did something, I don't know what he did, but, this is not something that's totally, in a different, zip code, but it's got definitely a different vibe. And the vibe was we made space for Thor to do what he does, but moreover, the way it all came about and the comfortability, it yielded an immediate trust where there wasn't any worry or concern. So we could be in the moment. We could not know what's happening next, but not worry about what's happening next, because we're all here now. I found the greatest experiences that I have as a music fan when I'm at a concert is when a band forces me to be in the moment with them. I found very often that when I saw Swans, the iteration that Thor was in for a 7 or 8 year period, I saw them a number of times. They were one of the bands that were able to do that. They can grab you and pull you and have you there with them. There's no thought about today. There's no thought about tomorrow. There's no thought about the thing that went wrong at work. You literally are just in this zone. So, I mean, I like it when bands can do that to me as a fan. And I know that when Paul and I were in the studio that day, I definitely felt a very now connection to the now moment in the creativity that was going on there that I don't know that I've felt before. I think it was because Thor brings with him not just the talent. It's like a whole glowing persona of sorts. It's hard to really describe.
It's Mjolnir. It's the hammer of Thor.
The way he swings the hammer. He swung us in a direction we never swang, and we never was swanging before. I'll take that much.
So, Thor, Paul and Ev have both mentioned that they kind of felt, not necessarily that you were taking the lead, but they were kind of following you at points. Did you feel that when you were in the studio at all, or did it feel more collaborative? Did you feel like you were guiding them at times, or was it something completely different for you?
Well, in improv, no matter how many people there are, but in the world of improv, somebody always sort of like starts the conversation. And I've gotten, because I've done improvised music now for a long time, I've gotten and I listened to all of the cinema that I could get my hands on before I went and met them. So I knew what a little bit what they were about. And we had conversations on the
Info Ghetto.
Info Ghetto, exactly. But I didn't mind. I didn't mind being the person to, like, when I could tell one idea was sort of winding down to go. Oh wait, I have this other idea. I bet these guys would do something cool with it. So then maybe I would just start this real, sort of maybe like a real repetitive organ or synthesizer part and just see where these guys go with it.
Cool.
But they'll do something super cool over this. Also, playing with another drummer is so fun. When you're in your first 30 bands that you're in or whatever, you play with a bass player and a guitar player and, maybe another guitar player, a singer, a keyboard player, or a horn player. But I don't know how old I was before I started playing in bands with multiple percussionists, but it's so fun.
Really?
Because you can sort of pass the drummer sort of thing back and forth. And yeah, and improv really is about trust. And I knew these guys were cousins and I really just liked them. And I felt, honored to be there. And that's
awesome.
Music isn't always a great way to make a living. Do I need to even say that? But it's like it's the best way I've ever known to build community,
Well, this album is so cool because it makes me wish I knew how to play an instrument better. It makes me want to go and improv some stuff, but I just wanted to mention this before we start wrapping up. Voiceless Idaho. Ev, congratulations, because I think this is the very first time I've ever heard Walk the Plank as a song lyric.
Pirate stuff.
I'm always a winner.
I'm glad that I could scratch that itch, that plank itch for you and others. Lord knows I've had Walk the Plank scribbled in a notebook for a long time. So
finally got a chance to use it. Oh, yeah. That's the highlight of the album now. So the album's been out for a little while. Things are opening back up. Is there a chance to see a Cinema Thor live show anytime in the future?
Yes.
Near, distant?
We don't know when, but yes, that's likely to happen. I come to New York a lot, and so we'll make that happen at some point.
Oh, awesome.
I love that city. It's my favorite city in America, needless to say. We'll make that happen.
Man, I got to find out about that. Give me some notice so I can save up and get over there.
Okay.
Give me some notice, too. I would like to be involved.
Yeah.
Yeah. You'll be there. You'll be there, Paulie.
Breaking news to me.
Sure. We've already asked your boss to let you off work for that.
Yeah, I got it. We had to do that on the day of the recording. That was a work day. I don't know if anybody in my office will listen, but I think I called in sick that day.
It was worth it. It was worth it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Honestly, this is my favorite Cinema album to date. It really took you guys into wild new areas that I didn't know were possible. It was really a fun album to listen to. Fun, intense, but there's also softer moments. Info Ghetto being my favorite. So what is the best way for people to find the album, to hear it for themselves, to help support you guys so you can get this live show together? We can get Thor to New York and see this amazing show.
Yes, we must get Thor to New York. We are getting him on the next train, plane, automobile, or bicycle. Maybe a skateboard. I'll tie two together, put him on my back. It's going to happen.
Well, he's in Texas. We can get him some horses.
Yeah, don't forget, we also love Texas, and that's a state we've been to in and around as so many territories. It's not even funny. I could shotgun out 10 or 11 cities we've played there.
Yeah, I was born in Texas.
Stuff there, so who knows if we don't wind up there as well. But the point is, where you can find the music everywhere, of course, but Bandcamp is a place that a lot of smaller sized bands direct people. It's more of a community for us. It's not quite the mainstream streaming world where 100% of everyone's just kids streaming Drake. I mean, no one's really looking to interact with weirdo music. No one's listening to Casper Broach or Noi or, on Apple. But we are on Apple and Spotify and all those things. But the point is, Bandcamp is a place where you can get the vinyl directly. cinemacinema.bandcamp.com. cinemacinema.com is a place where you can find us. Mjolnir is the newest release. Again, it's vinyl, red vinyl. It's pretty cool. It's limited amount made. And then also it's streaming everywhere.
Streaming everywhere on the Info Ghetto.
Yes.
Info Ghetto.
Yes. Info Ghetto exclusive Mjolnir live.
Awesome. This has been so much fun getting the three of you guys on. It's awesome to have Evan and Paul on. This is the first time I've had you guys on at the same time, so this is awesome. Thor,
yeah, so fun to hang out with y'all.
Thor, it's just wonderful speaking with you. We're going to have to do a deep dive on you, have you on and do your own show like I did with Ev and Paul. And we'll work on getting that scheduled here in the future, hopefully.
Okay.
Thank you guys so much for spending an hour and 10 minutes with me. Thank you guys so much for creating this amazing piece of art.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Mark. You're the man.
Oh, before we do wrap up, what's the best way for people on the Info Ghetto to follow you guys, to stay in contact with you guys, to find out where shows are going to be for Cinema Cinema, for Thor and Friends, and for the eventual show together? So, Thor, what's the best way for people to follow you and stay in contact with you? Okay, we'll come back to Thor because I think he froze. So, Evan, Paul, what is the best way for people to follow Cinema Cinema?
CinemaCinema.com, Cinema Cinema Band, at Cinema Cinema Band is where you could find us on Instagram or Facebook. And at Cinema Cinema is where we are on Twitter. And cinemacinemaband.com is our website. And that's a portal where you can kind of pop through and find out everything about the band, all the tour dates.
All right. And neither of you guys happens to know Thor's info, do you? Because I don't know.
Thor is at Thor Harris on Instagram. As he posts about his shows there, from what I see.
Perfect.
So I think that'd be a good place to find him.
Yeah, I think he just dropped off. I don't know if that was intentional or accidental, but we did get his socials on here. So
quickly as he came, he left.
Arm swinging.
Arm swinging. It's exactly the way he should go.
Awesome. Guys, thank you so much. This has been a blast talking with you, both of you again. And when you do come to DC, or if I can get up to New York, we'll definitely try to hook up. And if we can't see a show, maybe at least get a beer or something.
Sounds great.
Awesome. Gentlemen, I will talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mark. Bye.
Doubt that the nose was broken. The blood flowed down my face, to my neck, to my chest. Everything rushed straight to my head.